Day zero is the moment before company formation, when a founder decides to take the plunge, follow their dream, and commit to pursuing their vision of change. On day zero, you'll hear founders tell their story. From the initial idea, through reactions by critics and skeptics, setbacks and successes, we'll cover it all. Behind every company is a founder with ambition, goals, dreams, and wisdom to be shared. Let's explore them together.
All right. I'm Rishi Sikka, and it's my great privilege to be hosting the Day Zero podcast. And we have as our guest here today, Dr. Erik Kulstad, who is the founder and chief medical officer for Attune Medical. Erik, thank you so much for being here today. Erik's a dear friend, somebody I've known. I think the viewers would just like to hear a little bit about what is your product and what it does, particularly for folks who are not physicians or who don't have a clinical background.
So, that was back 14 years ago, was around the time that the data came out showing there was a benefit to cooling people after a cardiac arrest. And the idea being that if somebody had their heart stop and had limited or no perfusion to their brain, even the best CPR doesn't necessarily compensate for that lack of oxygen to the brain. And so people can have, cognitive insult from that event. And cooling turned out to be something that offered some benefit in terms of improving patients' outcome, improving their neurologic function, allowing them to survive that catastrophic event and go home and theoretically go back to their day jobs. It occurred to me, I think we had a patient that was a cardiac arrest patient, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, the next step is get this patient cold. And I thought, there's a better way to do this. What you're doing. And what I came up with was doing it through the esophagus, and basically taking the idea of gastric lavage, which was, putting a tube in, but then putting liquid down into the stomach and then sucking back out, and then liquid back in and sucking it back out, and repeating that, ad infinitum. But my idea was to take that concept, make it a closed loop system, use the existing water blanket chillers that were already ubiquitous in the hospital, and design something that would be easy to place. Nurses could place it. You wouldn't have to get a physician with specialized training on how to place a central line into the hospital to place these, and leverage the very robust heat transfer environment of the esophagus.
Yeah, and it's been an incredible journey. And you took that idea then to the next step of actually a concrete and tangible product. Talk a little bit about that early part of that journey from ideation to like, now I gotta, you took the step and you built the thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the daunting part, right? Because most physicians, most clinicians, anyone in healthcare, has not, bridged into that sort of realm, and so there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's, even to this day, right? 14 years later, I still don't know what I'm doing, but back then I knew nothing, and so the thing that I think helped me the most was getting connected to the local incubator, even though they don't always like the term incubator because they generally offer other resources. But the idea being that in most large cities now these days, there's at least one, oftentimes multiple, groups that you can go to that offer resources in the form of mentoring, coaches, service providers, even investors that can help walk you through the treacherous path of taking an idea from, the back of an envelope or on a piece of paper as we were sketching it that day, to, something that's being sold on the market. There's an awful lot of steps in that. And it's, I think the conventional wisdom before having gone through that sequence of steps is that the idea part is the hard part. Everything else flows down from there. But the reality is it's the opposite. The ideas are relatively abundant. It's that those extra steps that are much harder and less well worn, that take most of the time and effort and energy. When I had the the idea to take it to that next step, I had relied on a lot of really smart people that happened to be around at the incubator in our city of Chicago at the time, and the recommendation from a colleague to actually build a prototype, not just take it to the next step, not just written down on a piece of paper. And I was fortunate enough at that point in time. A good friend of mine who was a mechanical engineer in the automotive industry was unfortunate enough at that point in time to have been laid off from Detroit, and when in 2008, when half the city was laid off. And so he had some spare time, and we got together over several days at his place in Detroit in the winter of Detroit. And when they could barely afford to keep the heat on, having both he and his wife been laid off. And we through hardware store parts, going to Grainger and Home Depot and aquarium stores, built all the pieces of equipment needed to design the device, a prototype, and do the experiments in his daughter's bathtub, and start collecting data to sort of measure out, were our calculations correct, and use that data then to actually bolster the first IP filings.
I'd like for you to talk about each of those pivots. The pivots are around taking formal investment, the pivot around relinquishing the CEO role and bringing in management, and then in some ways, the most important pivot was this one about product market fit, which is so important for, any CEO, founder of a company. I'd like to take each of those in turn. Let's start with the first one about, the decision, the challenges and the pitfalls with taking formal funding, not just the family and friends round that you did, but really doing the Series A, the Series B, et cetera. Talk a little bit about that pivot.
Yeah, that's a huge leap. Going from the idea to the concept to the prototype to realizing, oh yikes, we got to raise money. You start off with the 4 Fs, so the friends, family, founders, and fools. Putting in money before any sort of formal structure is created, and that's that's hard, but it's not relative to what you have to do later. It's relatively trivial. So the hard part then is going to the markets with your hat out and saying, I've got this idea, it's my baby, I think it's beautiful, and having everyone tell you it'll never work. Your baby is hideous, and we want nothing to do with you. So, and the hard part about that, I think, for everybody, is that there's a lot of rejection, and most people in healthcare have done very well in school and in everything they do. They can take a test and get more than 70% right, more than 80% right, and so you're brought up that way. To think that anything less than a 70% success rate in things that you do is tragedy. And the reality for fundraising is that when you go out and start doing the road shows, going to different business plan competitions, investor meetings, pitches, angel groups, and spending days at a time, weeks at a time on the road, going to different meetings to give these presentations, you're dealing with rejection to the level of 98, 99% of the time, and especially early on in fundraising. And so that's a hard interaction with reality that most people are not prepared to. I certainly wasn't prepared for it. And so you really have to rely on mentors to say, look, this is okay. You're not going to get funded your first time around. And once you get that one or two interested folks, then you can start working with what you get, what you end up with. And we did, when we got an SBIR grant relatively early on, and that was helpful for non-dilutive funding, but it's you can't run a company on SBIR. It gets you the interest from potential investors. With the one that we received, one of the requirements for the second phase of that funding was that we go out to the market and have strangers invest in the company, and the NSF would match to a certain level. So that really forced our hand and just said, okay, you know what, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it, and we've got to go out and, three of us sometimes into a hotel room, a $60 or $90 a night hotel room, because that's all we could afford. And we couldn't justify putting too much of our own money into it. Not that we were, in a position to put in a lot of money. And as we got investor money, of course, you don't want to spend investor money on anything but what you have to spend it on to get to the next milestone. And so we ended up doing a Series A, B, and C, a bridge round, a seed round first, an A, B, and C, and a couple of bridge rounds in between. And to date, have now reached a point where we don't have to raise money again. We're now cash flow positive. So.
Congratulations on that. Certainly a lot of elements in that piece around perseverance, resilience, and patience. So thank you.
Tolerance for pain, I think, is maybe
tolerance for pain.
I don't know if I have the patience so much as the tolerance for pain.
Let's talk about the next sort of second, I think, important transition in the organization, and that was you relinquishing the CEO role, bringing in formal management, not just the CEO, but I think the entire team. Talk a little bit about that piece as well.
Yeah, I was in a unique position in one sense that I still had a full-time job as an ER physician, and was reluctant to take on a leadership role at the company. I wanted to sort of have the ideas, be the medical mind, but did not want to suddenly find myself managing, people and, regulatory affairs and, all the things that you do. I mean, it's hard enough managing investors. And so despite my reluctance to be a CEO, I served as the CEO for many years as we sort of, looked for somebody to come in and take that role. And part of it is you at the early stages, you can't afford to pay a CEO. You need somebody good, and nobody good is going to work for free. And so you're in a bit of a quandary because there's not much else you can do at the early stages. And once you get to a level where, okay, this looks real, this is something that's getting some traction in the market, it makes it easier to bring on a professional, somebody who's really focused on performing the duties of a CEO. And some of them are really fun, and some of them are just horrendous. So it takes a unique person to take that sort of that has that skill set and that capability and the willingness to do it.
And I think the third major transition or pivot, which in my mind, when I look at the course of your company, is the one that really now kind of turbocharged everything. And it's this issue of product market fit. Do you have you started off in temperature cooling for cardiac arrest. And just to frame this part, there's a pretty big pivot that happened in the company a couple years ago. Was it accidental?
At one point, I got a phone call from one of these service providers of market research asking me questions about what I thought the market looked like. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute. So if you're getting your information from me, there's a problem. That's the flaw. So I think what we were really lucky because we had a few different areas that we thought might be interesting for the device. And early on, when we were cooling patients primarily, we saw people wanted to use it for warming in the operating room, particularly for burn patients and trauma patients, to avoid inadvertent perioperative hypothermia. And so that provided the impetus to expand the name from advanced cooling therapy into Attune Medical, so that we didn't, sort of pigeonhole ourselves into cooling. But then about 5 years ago, maybe a little more than 5 years, all right, about 5 years ago, we got around the same time, 3 electrophysiologists had read a paper on our device in the journal Resuscitation. And so for some reason, they just saw it come across their desk, talking about esophageal cooling. and all at the same time roughly thought, you know what, this would be interesting because I've always thought that if I could apply cooling in the esophagus during left atrial ablations, I could reduce the likelihood of injuring the esophagus when I'm causing the intended lesions on the posterior wall of the left atrium to treat atrial fibrillation. And so as we heard that, hey, there's some physicians that are taking our device from the critical care unit down the hall into their EP lab, deploying it into the patients in the EP lab and getting very interesting results, that caused us to take a look. And so, we spent some time learning about the effect size that was being seen in these individual hospitals, realized that it looked large enough that we should start investigating this on our own, or at least supporting some studies that would formally quantify the effect size. And as we saw the interest in this approach grow, and more of our preclinical, we did some animal studies to better examine the effect of this approach. We did some mathematical models. Everything started pointing to this being a potential game changer in the industry. And at the same time, physicians were telling their friends about this, and friends and colleagues in the electrophysiology space. And so in short order being, like 5 years, went from a critical care market growing at 10% a year, maybe 15 or 20% on a good streak, to the electrophysiology market growing at 100% a year, doubling yearly. And now working with FDA on a clinical study and to expand the indication specifically for this benefit, and seeing a very different endpoint than what we ever would have gotten in critical care. And so, I mean, it's just a perfect example of, first of all, the need to be able to pivot when the opportunity knocks, and the importance of having product market fit that is really hard to determine a priori. I mean, you really don't know till you get into the market.
It's been there was the pandemic, but then there's been a tough macroeconomic environment, obviously interest rates going up, the question of a recession. Tell us a little bit about how that has or has not impacted Attune, and any actions you're taking or have taken in response. I know that's a big thing on everybody's, entrepreneurs' minds right now.
Right, because the MDMA just had their conference this afternoon and had people addressing this very topic, and especially what does the market look like for exits? What are valuations doing? What sort of deals are happening in the space, and they broke it down by regulatory pathway between 510K and PMA. We're in the middle of that, so we're a de novo device, and there just aren't many de novo approvals these days. So it's a much less robust group from which to prognosticate or derive data from. So broadly, I think everyone's worried about what's happening and what will the impact be on deals, acquisitions over the coming year. The consensus from the folks speaking at MDMA today was that there would be there's a little bit of a lull at the moment, but it seems like it maybe is picking up a little bit, and everyone expects 2023 to have a resurgence to make up for the little bit of a pause that there has been here sort of in the second half of 2022, and so we haven't really done anything differently other than just focused on growing the business, getting all the metrics that we need, getting label expansion through FDA, and learning as much as we can about what ancillary benefits may exist with this approach.
That's great. Well, building on this and sort of the two last questions, any prognostication you can offer on what the future might hold, short term, long term, for Attune, without giving away any company secrets or anything you could tease for us?
Yeah, I mean, given the milestone that we hit, at the beginning of this year of reaching cash flow positivity, that increases our attractiveness, I think, to a lot of investors,
Yeah.
a lot of acquirers, I should say. And so I think we now offer, some accretive value to the right acquirer. And so the timing window for an ideal transaction for us, sort of begins sort of towards the end of this year and goes in through 2023.
Any parting words of wisdom for physicians or anybody who's clinical, who's thinking of starting their own company or is in the midst of their own company earlier on? Any rules for the road? I mean, you've had great lessons throughout this entire podcast, quite frankly. But anything else you want to sort of capstone on?
Yeah, no, I've been lucky to have a lot of good lessons, none of them fatal, and always, live to see another day despite, any obstacles or mistakes that I've made. But I think the key is if, for clinicians out there that are saying, hey, I've got this idea, I keep wanting to do this, but I have no idea what to do. It's the first part is to, take it, one step at a time, and don't get daunted by the complexity of tasks ahead. And then the next step is to get connected to the local incubator. Again, if you're not in a city that has one, you're probably not that far from a city that does. And they're relatively easy to find. Google search for healthcare incubator in your city. Will get you at least to the first person you can ask, and that gives you, it gives you the benefit of getting plugged into a system where they can figure out sort of where the biggest need is. You might already have done an MBA, for example, and you've got some, business plan capabilities, or you can, build a spreadsheet on pro formas. But wherever the biggest need is, incubators are generally the place to go, because you've got a lot of people there that are willing to help. Many who'd like to invest in the right opportunity, and that I think that gets you to the point where now you've got different directions to go, but with the right mentorship. And again, I can't emphasize enough, the right mentorship is key. Then you'll at least be in the right pathway to just start taking the slings and arrows of the uncertainties of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, Erik, that is great parting advice. Congratulations on all you've achieved, and fingers crossed for the future. And can't wait to hear more good news from Attune. Erik, thank you so much for being here on Day Zero.
Rishi, thank you very much. The honor is all mine, and appreciate the opportunity.